Hi, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of When Life Happens, the podcast about mental growth. My name is Simone Boersma. I'm a pedagogue, your host, and owner of Kinderwijs Gouden. Today, I will speak with Dr. Silas, who lives and works in the USA. Beside the fact that he's a brilliant psychologist, he also is a well-known speaker abroad. And we have a thing in common, our interest for trauma, mental trauma. We speak about EFT, a method used by people who suffer from PTSD. But what does EFT stands for? That stands for Emotional Freedom Techniques, also known as tapping. We also talk about why it's so important to see that mind, body, and spirit are related to each other and connected if it comes to mental health. And Dr. Silas tells his reason why he became a psychologist in the first place. And that is very, very personal. Thank you, Dr. Silas, for being so open, so inspirational, and telling us so much about trauma in such a short time.
Perfect.
Okay, so Dr. Silas, thank you so much that you want to join in. Let's start right away, actually, with your experience in life, and of which I was reading about the way why you started your practice and your study of psychology. That was the loss of your sister.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's correct. Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about that period and how it affected you?
Sure. Well, and let me just say also, thank you so much for having me as part of this podcast, and I'm just honored to share. So thank you. And basically, that was. So I was in high school at the time, and my sister and I were really close growing up, where we would do like just so much together. We were silly together. We would dance and crack up together and create funny skits and stuff together. And there was about 3 years between us. So she was a little older, and she ended up going off to college in New York while we stayed in our hometown in Boston, or just south of Boston. And fast forward, she ended up being murdered just before I graduated. Well, essentially just before Christmas, my senior year. And I was just really lost. This was something that I remember just being so confused and overwhelmed with all different emotions. And I was like, but she was just alive yesterday. I just spoke with her and now she's gone. Like, what? And so, I made it through the rest of my senior year in high school. And I was going off to college, and I remember just feeling, again, so lost. And so I ended up kind of stumbling upon the university's counseling center.
Okay.
And because I knew I needed help. Like, I needed help navigating just being in college, right? Like being on my own for the first time. Yes, which is a lot. And now being in college, not having my sister anymore, and also being in a city that was pretty dangerous then. And so, because it was kind of at the tail end of kind of a lot of violence at that time. So there was a lot of different factors there, but therapy really helped me work through all of that. And I ended up going to individual therapy, and my therapist suggested group therapy. And I was like, no, I'm not going. I don't want to go. Like, I'm good talking to you, but not with other people. And she said, well, just trust me. Like, I bet this will be pretty, healing for you. It's also a group of people who have lost various family members for whatever reason. And sure enough, it was, I'm just so grateful that she led me in that direction, and I chose to trust her. So yeah, therapy has always been, really important for me. And especially, again, to process that loss, which was so deeply felt for me.
So it was actually a healing factor, but also an inspiration for you.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was kind of twofold, where there was a personal aspect of it, where it was healing. Yeah, which I think a lot, that's almost like when I think about our purpose, I think we go through things that are painful, And by helping other people heal, because we can relate to them now, it actually helps us in our healing process too. So it's circular,
Yeah.
and that's how I see even my relationship in the therapy room with other clients is I'm learning and growing with them, just as much sometimes. So yeah, and I really wanted to also work with youth at that time, and this was going back over 20 years ago, but at that time working with youth who were in the system, that was important to me because I wanted to help prevent somebody from going down the same path of the person who took my sister and her roommate's life. And so I really started working with a lot of adjudicated youth and similarly to what we were talking about just before, is that if I could reach one person to have them not bring all this pain and hurt and trauma on another family, then that to me would have been worth it.
Exactly. Yeah, we were talking about just before we started this podcast that I said to you, yeah, if we reach out to one person and it changes that person, you won the game.
That's right.
Right? Yeah, exactly. So we have the same vision in that, the same opinion in that.
Yes.
Yeah. Actually, it's really rather beautiful that something which is so painful turned out to be so inspirational for you.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that, like, even as I reflected back later in life, I realized I wouldn't be a therapist, had this not happened. And I wouldn't have been led down the paths that I have been led down had this not happened. And so while it's hurtful and painful and traumatic and all those things, and I would never wish it upon anybody else, and if I could undo it, I would absolutely undo it. And there's still a sense of gratitude for being able to take what I needed to take from this event and apply it accordingly to not only myself but to the betterment of other people.
Yeah. And that's really driving you, I think, until today. Yeah. Do you think that therapy, when you started therapy, because, for example, in your case of loss, that you will actually be in therapy your whole life?
I did and I didn't. I worried that I would have to be in it for my whole life.
I think
Like initially,
people are.
they are, and yeah, because people come into therapy saying the same thing, and yeah, so I worried about it. And then when I started going to psychoanalysis, and when I was in grad school, they suggested that we go through our own therapy again,
Yeah.
or just in general. And then for me, it would have been an again. So instead of doing individual therapy, I was like, well, let me try this analysis thing, right? Like, I don't know what it's about. I've already done the individual and group work. And I didn't realize it was like 4 times a week, like just free association, with my analyst sitting behind me taking notes. I'd always be like, what are you writing back there? Like, what are you saying about me? But yeah, so going to that during my grad school career for several years. And then I've gone through other types of therapy. I've done EFT, for myself. I've had coaches who have also served as therapists and mentors who have helped to help me process things. So it really is a lifelong thing. And I find myself, like, when I'm not in it, craving it. Like when I'm not actively seeing somebody, I find
Well, I
myself.
think then you find your passion in life.
Right.
And you mentioned it. You mentioned EFT rather quickly in between, but it is a major aspect of how you are working. Can you tell us a little bit more about the people who are listening, what EFT is and how you use it in your treatments or guidance?
Sure. So EFT is it stands for Emotional Freedom Techniques. And you may have also heard it referred to as tapping.
Exactly, yeah.
Yep, because you're literally just tapping on different acupressure points while you send a calming signal to your brain, but also you start to shift around some energy in your body. So let me break that down a little bit more. But what I will say is I came across EFT as a treatment when I was working on many different military bases as a contractor here and internationally. And I was seeing a lot of people with trauma. And, at that time, there were people who had been off to wars, and just experienced some extreme traumas that I couldn't understand. And my traditional training was very psychoanalytic in nature, very Freudian.
Yeah.
And so what I was finding in my work at that time was I was actually kind of re-traumatizing people by having them just retell their story.
Yeah.
And so I was like,
because that's a great, sorry to interrupt you, because that's a great mistake, right? Is
yes,
because I recognize that what you're saying right now is by retelling. People say, tell your story, and that's really good. But sometimes people who are traumatized, they relive it.
That's right.
And if they don't have the right guidance at that moment, then you increase their trauma. And I think people misunderstand, like having PTSD or another kind of trauma, that it's not all the same by only talking about it. I think you can split it up, because you're also very good in working with people with PTSD, as I understand.
Yes.
And is then the tapping, is that really a way for them to heal?
Yes, and really what I see it doing is it combines mind and body, or emotion and body. And so with traditional talk therapy and having people tell their story, we're not combining their bodies, right? We're not involving their bodies in the process, when in reality their bodies are the very things that encode the trauma, that hold the trauma, that keep the trauma.
Exactly.
As Bessel van der Kolk says, the body keeps the score.
Yeah.
So and
Yes.
That's what I was starting to see. Like, there was one patient in particular I worked with, and he was great, but he was so traumatized, and he came in and he was just so balled up. And and so I knew, like, my work had to be deeper than just telling this story. And so what I discovered through EFT is, like, we can tap on these different acupressure points, send a calming signal to that part of the brain that otherwise, when traumatized, can go off and say danger, 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 right? That's the amygdala.
Yes, exactly.
And so when people retell, sometimes it's almost as though it's happening again. And because the body is responding. So by tapping on these points, we say to that part of the brain, you're safe right now, you're safe right now, you're safe right now, it's okay right now. And so when we do that, then we can process parts of that trauma differently than when we're worked up, than when we're triggered.
So if I say it correctly for the people who are listening, instead of the fight, flight reaction or the freeze reaction, you make sure that you have a safe place in your body which can regulate the emotion and put all those stress hormones down.
Yes.
And let those cortisol down and all those other stress hormones, and make it a safer place, really your body a safer place.
That's right. Yeah, you put that so beautifully. Like, I didn't yes, but that is absolutely it. And that's what this does, is it lowers literally it lowers your cortisol. And because when we're stressed, we're not thinking the same, right? If I'm being chased by a dinosaur, like, and you ask me, what 7 times 365 is, I don't care at that time. If you ask me to answer an email about scheduling something, I don't care in that moment. Like, I'm just trying to get to safety.
Yeah,
and
one system is acting. So your brain is really just doing one thing.
Right.
So I think that's really a beautiful method, if you really can flip that emotion. So really flip the automatic response of the body to a safe mode. That's beautiful. That's a beautiful way of acting and healing. Is that also, if I ask, because a lot of, I think people from our field know, of course, Dr. Levine, who explained the somatic experience. Is it related to that in that way? Can you relate it to the somatic experience?
Yes, absolutely. That's interesting you said that, because I was just talking to a friend yesterday about Peter Levine and somatic experience. Yes, yes. And that's it. So I actually got this friend interested in EFT, and I've done some work with that same friend. And which is cool to like see people that you've worked with then take what they need in their journeys. And yeah, so somatic experiencing is the same concept, that we hold our traumas in our bodies. And so to move it out and to move it through our bodies is really important. So he does things like, it looks like almost convulsing or shaking. That's one way to start to move some of that energy out, because in trauma, there's an energetic loop that just gets replayed in our minds and our bodies. And so if we can start to get it out, that's so important, because then we can step off of that kind of the hamster wheel that we get stuck on, and then look at life from a different perspective. And we can show up a little bit differently in relationships and whatever it is that we do. So yeah, it is the same concept. And there are other ways that you can tap too, right? Like you can just tap on the sides of your arms, you can tap on your legs. It doesn't have to be in that formula that EFT necessarily dictates, but again, just noticing where in your body you might feel certain things and starting to move that energy out.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a beautiful message to reach out to people, but I also agree with the fact that mind and body and mental health is all combined. And I think we see that everywhere. And especially now and during the pandemic, we are we're still in, of course, we're going a right way. Thank God. So I have a question for you, actually. How do you think that as a society we can deal with all of this stress which is coming out? And again, then I come back to the stress hormones, about that our system really is overflowing with stress. How do we need to cope with that as a society at the moment?
One of the things that comes to mind first and foremost is finding community again, because there's even deeper and faster healing in community. And because also with the recognition that it has to be safe, but that we've all been isolated from each other for the past year and a half. That's when things come to the surface, right? That's why we've seen so many things for people come to the surface, because it was easy to push it down, when we were constantly going and running and all these things. But finding that community that can help to support you at this time is so important. But also, again, moving from just the mind to what's happening in our bodies and starting to make those connections. And mental health and healing doesn't have to be like this heavy thing all the time. It can be fun, it can be enjoyable, it can be eye-opening, it can look like listening to music and just dancing. It
Do you
could
think
look
people really see it still as a heavy burden to take, or a heavy step to take? Mental health itself?
I think it's becoming less stigmatized. It's certainly lost some of its weight when it comes to
exactly.
like how
That's what
people.
I mean. Yeah, that's
Definitely since when I first started in this field. So I love seeing that. And I see like, and maybe it's just because of the people that I follow online, or but I just see this shift, this perspective shift in how we treat ourselves, how we treat each other, how we treat community, how we treat the planet. So there's like this growing awareness of the interconnectedness of it all. And that also includes mind, body, soul healing.
Yeah. You think that would be different without the pandemic? That we will just going along with everything.
Oh yeah, we would not have had the level of this, the consciousness shift and awakening that we had as we did. You know, we needed the pandemic to slow things down for us to come to those realizations.
Mhm.
So I know that sounds, I hope that doesn't come across as like sounding morbid or unfeeling, because it, you know, I truly do sympathize with people who have been deeply impacted by, you know, anything COVID related,
Mhm.
right? And at the same time, I also do believe that we needed that. We need pain to wake us up, right? Um, we need, and not need, but it helps us to wake up to life around us.
To
It helps
wake
us
us up or to grow in life?
a little bit of both. A little bit of both. Well, and it depends on what we do with it, right? Because we always have a choice too. I could wake up but do nothing with it, or I could say, you know what? I have this pain, I have this hurt, I have this confusion. What can I do with it? Similar to you, like the fact that you said, well, let me create this you know, podcast where I can reach people.
Yeah.
Like that's the way that we do it, right? It's taking and owning what has happened and creating a new story from it.
Yeah. Yeah, because I do think that stories in life are important. It's a thing to share and a thing of opening your soul. And
Yes.
again, with the note beside that it needs to be done at a safe place, in a safe environment with the right people and within the right situation.
Hmm.
And especially when somebody is ready for it. I think that's also a really important aspect of it. Not to
Right.
force, not to force a memory to come up and relive it again without it's not meant to.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. So just one question to go back
Hmm.
about PTSD, where you're very, very good at, very familiar with. Um, a lot, what I notice here, a lot of people know the term, so they know PTSD. They know it's related most of the time to veterans or to military people. What they do not know is that it also comes across really a lot with people from the ambulance, people from the police force, but also at teenagers, people who are sexually abused.
Hmm.
And I can continue. So from
Hmm.
your point of view as a doctor of psychology, can you give a little bit of an explanation about the diagnosis of PTSD and the most effective treatments from your point of view?
Mm. Yeah, so I'll say this. So PTSD evolved from something called shell shock.
Mhm.
So after World War One, and they noticed that these veterans were coming back in a state of shock, and it was again embodied in their bodies, and so you know, it was first seen as shell shock, and so, and then as time went on, it evolved to become what we know now as post-traumatic stress disorder. And yes, it was developed primarily because of seeing the returning soldiers, the returning service members with all these symptoms. And so that's how it became essentially related to and associated with service members. But as you noted, and in my career, like, and as you've seen, anybody can have it, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Anybody can have it with you know, and you don't, it doesn't even have to be like a big trauma. But again, you know, any traumatic experience, something that our systems necessarily can't handle, they're hard to process, we don't know what to do with it. You know, that can be considered a trauma. So like you said, physical abuse, mental abuse, emotional abuse,
Mhm.
sexual abuse, anything like that. But also just a sudden and unexpected losses.
Yeah.
You know, and again, that could be not only a physical loss of somebody we love, but it could be a loss of a job. That could be traumatic, or experiencing harassment at the job, or some any form of oppression. It can be traumatic too. And so even thinking about, it's also important, is this post for some people, or like when you're dealing with some kids, for instance, if they're still in that same environment, that it's not post at all.
No.
it's very present traumatic stress.
Mm-hmm.
And so, being clear about making those distinctions, and yeah, so that's kind of how I'd formulate it and kind of frame it.
Yeah. Well, it's beautiful said. And I think that's a beautiful way to end this podcast. And I really want to thank you for sharing your expertise and helping me to reach out to people. I hope you have inspired them. Well, I know for sure you did.
Well,
You
thank
did it
you.
you did it with me. So thank you. I hope we will speak soon again. And
Yes.
I wish you a very good day.
Thank you, Simone, and thank you for allowing me to be a part of this podcast, like I said, and to reach at least one person out there who needs to hear this.
Yes, we agree on that. Thank you.
Yes.